and he will give us an even more other side. I hope, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to talk about from the perspective of conference and the journal review process, and so we sort of talked quite a lot from a community point of view. So in the basic week, and in some way the EuroRVVV probably adopted a similar approach, and we have a paper divided by 5 categories: the algorithm, system, and the application, design, study, evaluation, theories, and so on. So obviously the reproducibility is quite different from this sort of 5 categories. But we often, obviously, as either reviewers or particularly as an IPC member or associate editor, particularly occasionally if there's a more serious problem, goes to the conference co-chairs or the editor-in-chief and so on. They will have to consider various of the reviewers' comments, whether they are fair or not fair. So it's so common, and we've been on either side, most of us, and the reviewers request also to compare the outcome with those by whatever X, Y, Z, and so on. And they would like some quantitative results and the visual rendering results and so on. There are other issues with the system papers, and the people find the system, you can't access to the system, you can't compile it. How do you sort of judge the paper, which is considered to be system paper? In some way, the evaluation user study typically are much more repeatable in some way, and you can, as long as you provide the stimuli. But occasionally, how about the software used for the user studies or testing environment? Do you really require people to disclose that as well, for repeatability? And there's various issues with the analysis is provided and so on. So I'll put those 5 boxes that are those typical comments, and most people can see, or you can make judgments whether they are fair or not fair. Okay. So sometimes you may think it's fair depending on what actually is available, because if authors are asked to compare X and Y, and is Y and X sort of provide their codes online. And we do have a situation, in one of my reviewing process, which I was involved in managing it, and the reviewers clearly consider it was a major issue need to be compared. But at the same time, the author approached X and Y asking for code. X, Y said, no, I can't give you code. And also come back with a rebuttal statement to say we can't make a compare. But we implemented it anyway. The algorithm is much worse than what they say, and they put in a paper. And as a sort of associate editor, you sort of really say, do you want really the authors completely criticize the other paper almost in a very unfavorable manner? And those are the sort of issues that you all encountered, and how do you sort of address those problems? So there are many things you can actually consider to be whether reproducible. There are mathematical models itself, whether they are complete, correct, or every single step of the proof was there, and so on. Algorithm, which is most of the time we think about whether the algorithm is reproducible or not. Software implementation and a hardware-dependent implementation. There are testing parameters, which some people mentioned, which is a really important part. Then the performance results, are they really the same as what I would get if I run the same algorithm? The visual results, and the stimuli for user studies, apparatus for user studies, and the user testimony, which is almost totally not reproducible if you write sort of a user say it's a great system, and you take it to your own users, it's terrible. So how do you do it? So those are the various of issues and we have to consider. And so far we talk about largely on the part of a much more algorithm part, so I'm going to largely focus rest of my talk on that particular part. So the issue is the effort. So first it is really what sort of effort needed for author to provide reducible results. I guess the first stage is references, which we actually Heike mentioned earlier on, was a quite important issue. And quite often, authors are not really providing a complete set of references, and particularly the background reference for the work particularly related to their work. So that should be easy to ensure those parts should be provided. But it's not easy, as Heike already indicated, there are so many papers around. So it's a challenge for reviewers even to know what references should be cited or not cited. So we sort of anecdotally quite often reviewers pick up, oh, you should do this, you should do that. And occasionally you have those speculative reviewers to say, oh, there must be reference around there, and they shouldn't really have cited. And so, but not providing any specific ones. So those are the issues we need. So mathematical details, which is really another thing we probably should really ensure a paper is provided, or at least there will be some references to back it up. The algorithm including its core components of algorithm, as well as a few other sort of additional things. And so most of it will say anything you claim novel, which is usually the core part, which should ideally be disclosed in either pseudocode form or flowchart form, and those things, and it should be reasonably well provided. Then the source code. And the source code is also including the core part, reflects the algorithm, because providing a pseudocode or flowchart doesn't really necessarily indicate your implementation details. So whether you should really provide source code in a bit more detail. But whether what subroutines you call, what sort of other things you use, and how do you read the data files, and whether those are important or critical, that's a question. Executable software is even worse case in that, so it's require a lot of effort for everyone and provide the executable codes to work, and because you have to provide the environment for people to get this working as well. On the top of that, lots of them are hardware dependent and hardware platforms. So it's become really, we start to put too much effort, sort of pressure on authors. At the end, it's just writing a paper, but we sort of start to really create a lot of difficult for authors in some way. And another thing is, even if you provide all those things, it's also the effort for the reviewers. Do they just simply say, as long as it's there, I don't really need to look at it, so I'm fine with it. Or they actually have to read those things. Imagine you have to read the source codes, which has become a problem. And if you have to sort of try those things and test it to see whether also all the parameters said is correct, the results produced. I mean, as a reviewer, you say, no, I don't have time for those things. So those are also the burdens we have to really take into account or really involving that. Now, on the top of that, when we also consider what is the future of research, if we often ask them to compare with the results, what's their effort in order to reproduce the work? So there are various things involving algorithm, source code, and so on. As I associate editor or the IPC member, when you sort of as a senior reviewer looking at the paper, you have to judge whether other reviewers making comments to say, please compare this one. Is it a fair request? And because it may be just too much work for the author to do and to make a compare. Maybe the code or the reference supposed to be to compare with is just too difficult to implement or too hardware dependent and so on. So those are the issues of everyone. So there's a lot of really the question we actually have. It's not that easy from that point of view. So at the end is the balance, and so the balance is if we could make a sort of a little bit more effortless in some way for everyone, including the authors and as well as the reviewers to sort of make judgment, then what we need is a kind of an infrastructure for the community. So we need a kind of infrastructure people actually can provide the reproducible results in some way and in a staged way. And some people mentioned biology, and so biological community so far has been doing a very, very good job. So most of funding bodies in the US, Europe, and Canada, and have various policies involving the data, and it has to be experiment, has to be reproducible, repeatable, and the data has to be available, and so those are the things. And if you look at Wikipedia, there's about over 100 databases and metadatabases in biology, just for storing this data and various other things. And so it just shows the community is being really well organized in that way. Those are the infrastructure which I'll talk about, the databases. And at Oxford, so I'm involved in one of the biological group, which is a database group, if you put it that way. And their job is to create a database for storing various information to maintain database. And it's a small one, in fact, it's not that big one, but they have 22,000 pieces of experiment data, the metadata stored with them. And imagine our community have 22,000 pieces of algorithms stored somewhere. And just imagine that actually is a tiny small database in many ways, so in the community point of view. So that is really reflects something perhaps we should be doing. So taking into account sort of what I feel the process we need to is to sort of really gradually introduce the reproducibility. To start with, and obviously we need some guidelines and for authors, for reviewers to say what is a acceptable approach and what is sort of encouraging approach and so on. And what we really want is to take into account the modern search engine, whichever search, whether it's Google, whether it's Explorer and so on, they start failing us. They start to really fail us because you type the keywords in, it just gives you hundreds, thousands of references, and fundamentally, for the authors, for the reviewers, it's very, very difficult to work with those things. So I really would think ideally the community should start working together to go back to the olden days, which some of us do, is to provide a list of references on specific topic, and then we collected and updated and sort of if we can have a network of community resources like. I'm talking about specific one. I don't really need to say a big database for volume rendering, which is really far too big. But say, how many papers published on taxonomy for visualizations? How many, say, gradient-based transfer function papers published? So it's a very specific one. So the community can manage it, one person work out this one, and everyone email him to say, oh, please include in my paper, I'm also publishing something on gradient-based transfer functions. And so somehow we link. It's sort of could be done in wiki or whatever mechanism. If some of us more willing to talk about detail how to organize these things, and that would be really, really great to have a community resources. It's either for the authors, particularly young authors, to start with. It's also easier for reviewers. If the reviewers see it's a gradient-based transfer function paper, then you go onto that web page and say, I noticed so 50 papers published on that, and I can judge roughly the importance and the less important papers whether you have cited and so on. So those are the sort of starting point. Then gradually, I really would like is to voluntarily sharing the algorithm into pseudocode and flowchart in some way, and moving towards the voluntary sharing source code. And I personally don't believe we could ever insist on you must share all the source code, you must share all external software. And it would be great if it happens, but I don't believe that may be a fair burden on the authors and so on. But at some stage, maybe the core source code, particularly if you're writing a technical paper on an algorithm, which is the novel things, then the core code, whether it's implementing C++ or whatever, Java, and that shouldn't be really disclosed because pseudocode doesn't really necessarily indicate the things. And then regarding data, which I missed out, and I personally do sympathize on the issue of published data. However, if you publish an algorithm paper, the data itself doesn't necessarily be real data. You can always you can always accompany algorithms with a testing data set, which is usually good enough to indicate how outcome works and not. So I think the community need to work together to produce some things, and we shouldn't really take authors or reviewers as sort of our shooting targets, and at the end they have their own difficulties.
Thank you, Min, for the very nice wrap up, so to say.